According to one legend, the game of golf was first played on ice by the people of Holland. I can imagine what thoughts that brings to a golfer's mind. Trying to play the game on a beautifully conditioned golf course is tough enough. Imagine what it would be on ice. Then, too, they call the game of golf goof. Perhaps they knew something. At any rate, these are the tools of the trade of a professional golfer. Of all the games of sport, I don't know a game that is more of an individual challenge nor tougher to master. If the game of golf has ever come close to having one man dominate it, that man would be Ben Hogan, affectionately known in golf history as Bantam Ben. We'll be back with his story, a story of a legend, in a moment.
The Ben Hogan Story, brought to you by Chevrolet and your Chevrolet dealers, where you'll find the big seller, the big rider, Impala.
Make your move and move beautifully. Chevy's out to prove beautifully that the big rider is Impala.
Impala, 18 feet long, nearly 4,000 pounds, with the widest front tread in its field, so you ride solid, silent, stable. It comes on big with a 250 horsepower standard V8. The big rider with the big resale value. See your Chevrolet dealer for Impala, America's most popular car.
The big rider is Impala.
Texans are proud of many things. The Alamo, the Astrodome, oil wells, and Ben Hogan. Hogan is also proud of Texas. The man who has traveled the world now lives just 75 miles from where he was born. That was in the tiny town of Dublin, Texas in 1912. There were 3 children in the family. Ben was the youngest. The resemblance to his father was apparent from an early age.
I know we used to go rabbit hunting, at least he did, every time it snowed down in our little town called Dublin, Texas. And I drug the rabbits home for him. That's about all I could do in those days. We came to Fort Worth when my father was very ill. His profession was blacksmith. He was an excellent man. He was a poor man. He used to ride me around the block on our old horse almost each day. He used to lend almost all of his money to other people. And, of course, he died when I was 9 years old, and my mother went to work as a seamstress in a store there in Fort Worth. My brother and I started selling newspapers. My sister, of course, went to school.
You wouldn't exactly say Ben Hogan was born to the green. He didn't find out about the game of golf until his teens, mainly because he was so small. But his colleagues soon discovered the tiger that lurked in that small frame.
I was selling newspapers at the time, and I found out through a friend of mine that they had a golf course about 7 miles from my house, and they paid 65 cents for 18 holes for a caddy. And it only took about 3.5 to 4 hours to make 65 cents. And that was twice as much as I was making selling newspapers till 11:30 to 12 o'clock at night. So I sure wanted to get in on this. I couldn't wait the next day to get to the golf course, and when I got there, I found that they had more caddies than they needed. And of course, most of these fellows were much larger than I was, and they didn't want any new caddies there because I might take one of their jobs. So the next day, I went out and I posed as another fellow's brother, so they wouldn't, they'd leave me alone. But they found out that that wasn't the truth. and they gave me the works. They put me in a barrel and rolled me down this big hill with a lot of rocks, and after I got down to the bottom of the hill, they came down with sticks and everything else and gave me a pretty good beating, and I'd go back up the hill, and they'd take my cap off and throw it down the hill, and I spent my day going up and down this hill without a job, of course. But I was pretty persistent in those days, and I went back the next day. And as one of the initiations out there, they have a kangaroo court, of course, and anyone that's tried in this kangaroo court, of course, always loses. And they picked out a pretty husky boy, a little larger than I was, for me to fight. And if you could whip this other fellow, then you were in. You could get the job out there. And after selling newspapers for a couple of years, I was pretty handy with my fists, and I gave this boy a rough time. And I got to be a caddy out there, and after then, they left me alone.
Hey, the golf ball didn't do you anyhow. Why try to kill it?
I'm just practicing, Mr. Gibbs.
You're the new caddy, aren't you? Golf ball's pretty sensitive. Now try another one. Remember, take it easy.
Yes, sir.
That's better.
Ben Hogan battled to become a caddy, and he had to fight to get to play golf. But once he discovered the game, there was no stopping him, even though the tournaments were few and far between. Hogan was in a tough league right from the start. The young man in the hat next to Ben is Byron Nelson, later to become one of golf's greatest champions.
The first tournament I participated in was a caddy tournament at the Glen Garden Country Club, where I used to caddy. Each and every year, the membership used to put on a party for the caddies and let them play the course on Christmas Day. That night, they would give them a dinner and a party in the clubhouse. They had a practice field there, and I used to play up and down there all morning long, and we used to drive for a chase, and the shortest ball had to go pick up all the rest of them. You might be driving against 12 or 15 other caddies, and of course, when I first started, I always had to pick up all the balls every time we hit one. But I finally conquered that, where I wouldn't have to pick them up so often. And from there, I just progressed. My game improved a little bit, and I would try to save my money and buy a golf club. And in those days, they were too expensive for me. I didn't have the money or anything to buy golf clubs out of a golf shop or a set of clubs. And there was a dime store in Fort Worth where I used to save up $1, and I'd go down, and they had a great big barrel of golf clubs, and I'd every couple of weeks, I'd go down and buy one golf club. And I finally got a set of old wooden shaft, slick-gripped clubs that actually weren't any good, but they were mine. And I started playing a little golf out at a municipal course. It was about 8 miles from our house. I used to walk out there before daylight, play 54 or 72 holes in one day, and walk back home. In the meantime, I was caddying, and then when I became 16 years old, I could no longer caddy because if I was going to play any amateur golf at all, in those days, you would be a professional if you caddied past 16. So I got a job with the golf pro there in the golf shop, Ted Longworth. And I used to polish clubs all night and all day and put in wooden shafts, make golf clubs, and of course all clubs in those days were wooden shafts, and there never was a day that passed that somebody didn't break from 1 to 5, and I would have to put those in overnight so the player would have them for the next day.
Ben's play also improved, and like most youngsters, he felt he was ready to take on the world. The year was 1931, and Ben Hogan made a big move.
I turned professional when I was 19 years old and went to the Texas Open in San Antonio, Texas. The reason why I turned professional was that I didn't have the money to play the amateur tournaments, and if I was going to play golf, I had to make some money some way or other. And it didn't take me but about 3 days to find out that I wasn't ready for the professional ranks. And not winning any money there, I went back home and worked at odd jobs for a while, and then the next winter tour that came around, I decided I would like to try it again, and not just try one tournament. Maybe I could go to 4 or 5 and find out if it was possible for me to make it.
Determination, the trademark of Ben, was there in abundance. He worked hard on his game. He saved his money, and he tried again. Jimmy DeMerit was there when Ben came back.
He started back out, I would say, consistently around 1935 and 6 in there. And few people realize that the first tournament that Ben won in his long, illustrious career was actually when he was over 32 years of age, and that was the North and South Open, which was held at that time at Pinehurst, North Carolina. He always knew that Ben was there. Although he had not won a tournament, he had finished second and third. He said, "Jimmy, do you think I have a mental block of not being able to go to the winner with the winner's prize?" And something that in those days, I believe the players cherished a title more than they did the money. And I sincerely believe that he, although was winning consistently in the money, in the second and third in there, that he always felt that that title was eluding him for some reason or another.
The problem was pretty basic, and Ben knew it. He had a hook. A golfing malady that Hogan said was like walking around with a rattlesnake in your pocket. Sam Snead, who was winning, knew what Ben was going through.
I remember when I first started to play, I would see Hogan's name. He'd shoot 67, then 77. And he'd have one of those days where he would hit the green, and of course the ball would go through, and then he was having his difficulties making recoveries, and he was long. He was about as long as anybody. But he found out that this low hook, especially with long irons and long second wood shots, that he couldn't hold these hard greens, and especially if the pins were tucked in behind these bunkers. So therefore, he had to get the ball into the air, and so by changing it a little bit, he started moving it up into the air a little higher, then his score began to drop.
Some students of the game claim the golf swing is a natural occurrence, but most golfers will argue strongly about that. The pros also differ on the subject. Byron Nelson has one opinion, and Ben Hogan has another.
I don't think there was anything natural about golf to Ben. You take the exact opposite with Sam. Sam just picked up the club, went out and played great. But Ben has had to work and dig for every single good shot that he has, and it's to his everlasting credit that he has been willing and devoted enough of himself and his time to become the great player that he has and is.
I don't believe there is anything like a natural golf swing. I really don't think God had golf in mind when he made us. A golf swing is an unnatural thing, and it has to be developed. I think Sam Snead has a beautiful flowing swing, but it certainly isn't a natural one. He had to develop it. He had to practice it, just as anyone does.
After Hogan failed in his first attempt on the Pro Tour, his savings were depleted. He knew he wanted to try again soon, but comebacks have to wait for financial support.
I got a job at a little course, 9-hole course there called Oakhurst. That's no longer there. It's a housing development now. And I worked there until 1937. In the meantime, I married Valerie, and after saving up $1,400, I asked Valerie one day what she would think about me going on the tour. And she said, well, if that's what you want to do, you go right ahead and do it. She went right along with me. I started in 1937 at the General Brock Open in Niagara Falls, Canada. I think I won $50 there and $75 in a driving contest, and on through the summertime, through Detroit, Chicago, and whatnot, and then winning a little money all the way, $50, $75, never really making any money, and always drawing out of my $1,400.
I had wondered how I was going to broach the subject to tell him that actually we had just about $85 left. And finally I decided that I had to tell him. And so he said, let's just not talk about it, Valerie, because if I don't succeed in this tournament, when we go there, I promise you that we'll go back to Fort Worth and I'll never mention tournaments again.
The next day, we drove to Oakland, and checked into the Leamington Hotel. And across the street, there was a gravel parking lot, and of course that was the cheapest place I could park my car. And I parked there every night, and then the first day of the tournament, I had an early starting time, and I went out to get in my car, and the rear of my car is jacked up, and both wheels are gone. So I had to come in, get a ride from somebody else, and I was a little late getting out to practice, but I hit a few balls before starting, and as luck would have it, I won $286 in this tournament, and it goes without saying, I think it's the biggest check I've ever gotten in my life or ever will get. And it seemed that that was sort of the turning point for me, because I started making a living after that, sometimes missing, of course, but that's always been a very soft place in my heart, and it always will be.
Ben Hogan came to be called the Wee Iceman, a nickname given to him by his fans in Scotland. It was a compliment to his ability to concentrate on a golf course, to shut out the distractions, the people near him, the entire world, for 18 holes of competition.
He set his sights on a job, and that was his job to do, and so he went out to try to do it. And he was the kind of a man that out on the golf course that he liked to concentrate on the win and on the conditions on the turf and so forth, and there was never a fellow that was more exacting than he was in the game, and therefore when he went down the fairway with this concentration on his mind, that he appeared to the gallery that he wasn't friendly, but he's far from that, because I've spent many wonderful and happy hours with Ben with a lot of good belly laughs.
Well, Ben would never speak. He wouldn't say good shot, bad shot, you're on your own. When you're out there with him, he didn't give anything and he didn't ask anything. And he'd say, Sam, good luck on the first tee, and that was it.
And there on, you're on your own.
Or maybe if you're on the green, he'd say, well, Sam, I think you're away.
While I'm playing, I have little or no sense of humor. I wish I did have. I'm no Bob Hope at all, and I tell a very bad story. I would like to appear as a happier fellow. I am actually happy, but while playing golf, I give it the best I can give it. I love to play golf. That's what I'm there to do, play golf. I'm not there to tell funny stories. And I try to play as well as I can to give some of the people that might be watching a little pleasure out of watching me. I try to smile and laugh and tell stories in the locker room after the game is over, not out on the course.
I thought Ben had the greatest attitude toward winning of anyone, and how he kept his desire up to keep trying to win tournaments was we played in Rochester, New York many years ago, and we were out early, and Ben had, I think, about 8 birdies, and he shot 64 that particular round, and that is with a double bogey on the 17th hole. So we went in the clubhouse, and Craig Wood, myself, and Lloyd Mangrum was sitting there having a little libation, and we stayed there till about dark, just before dark, and this was 4 or 5 hours, and I look out in the fairway there, in the practice fairway, and I see someone swinging at the ball, and I couldn't believe it. I walked out, and it was Ben Hogan. And I said, Ben, what in the world are you practicing for? You had a perfect round today, 64, and you had 8 birdies, and why would you be out here working? And he said, well, Jimmy, he said, there's no reason why a golfer can't birdie every hole. So that's the attitude that he had toward the game.
Ben had the confidence he needed, and he started reeling off the victories. He was golf's leading money winner for 3 straight years, 1940 through 1942. After a hitch in the service, his game was better than ever. He came back to win the big ones, the PGA Championship in 1946, the U.S. Open in 1948, the PGA again in 48. Ben Hogan was #1, the top of the golf world. And suddenly, it all came crashing down. The time was February 1949.
Valerie and I had just bought a new house, And we were anxious to get home and get in this house, put some furniture in it and some rugs and whatnot, and have a little home life. We left Phoenix, of course, and we stopped in a little town called Van Horn, Texas. That's about 120 miles east of El Paso. We stayed there overnight, and the next morning we got up about 8 o'clock and left about 8:30, and it was a beautiful, sunshiny day, not a cloud in the sky. And we started driving, and about 15 miles out of Van Horn, I thought I had a flat tire, and I couldn't understand it, so I pulled off the side of the road. And as soon as I got out of the car, I could see that there's ice on the highway, a very thin coating of it. So I slowed down. After getting back in the car and driving on, I slowed down, and then we ran into a ground fog, and I couldn't see anything. I suppose I slowed to 10 or 15 miles an hour, watching the center line and the side of the road. And we were in this for about 5 minutes, I suppose, and all of a sudden I saw 4 lights in front of me. And I looked off to my right, and I was on a culvert, and I couldn't get off. And the next thing I saw was these lights coming right into me, and I jumped to the right.
I lost consciousness, and the next thing I remember was that when I came to, I looked all around me, and I didn't know where I was. And I looked out the window, and there was nothing but fog. Fog in the front of me and fog beside me. And I felt this tremendous weight on the back of me and on the back of my neck. And also there was something on this side of me. And I was so stiff and aching so that I could barely turn my head. And when I did, I glanced to the side, and Ben had fallen across me. And my first thought was that he's dead because he was so lifeless. And I began screaming. And when I screamed, Ben began moaning.
And I woke up a little later in the back seat of somebody's car out on the highway, and I remember 2 soldiers holding me there in the back seat. And then I went out again and woke up in the hospital in El Paso.
When Dr. Ochsner came, Ben's brother asked me to speak to him and ask him, would Ben be able to walk again? And he was the only person that gave us any encouragement. But he admits later that at the time he didn't realize what golf involved, and that when he meant Ben might be able to walk, it meant only just to be able to get around.
First, I had to learn to walk again. I had bandages from my feet up to my hips. The first day, of course, I got out of bed and walked around my bed. The next day, twice around the bed. Third day, 3 times. Next day, maybe around the room. And, I must have worn a hole or a track in that room, going around and around.
He was supposed to walk a certain amount each day. And once when I was in another part of the house, I didn't realize it. And when I went back, he had disappeared. And he was supposed to go with me, and we would walk perhaps a half a block, and then the next time we would take a little longer stroll. And on this day, it was even raining. And I looked for him. I couldn't find him. And I went outside. I knew what had happened. And he, believe it or not, he had walked 3 blocks in the rain. But when it began to rain harder, I found him standing on the corner with his umbrella. And of course, I stopped the car and made him get in. But he would do things like that, and that's why I worried, because I knew that he pushed himself too hard.
Golf was my life, and I didn't want to give it up. So I went to work, and it took me 11 months to play again.
As word of the accident spread, the sports world was stunned. The first reports were that Ben Hogan was dead. Jimmy DeMeritt, his closest friend, will never forget the moment he got the shocking news.
I never shall forget in 1949 that I drove into Tucson and was playing in the Pro Amateur when I received the horrible news that Ben actually was dead. So we went in. I was playing with our friend Del Webb, and we go in, call the State Highway Patrol, and they insisted that he was in serious condition, and but was okay as far as his life was concerned. And I managed to play in the tournament, and then went to the Hotel Du Hospital, which was in El Paso, and Ben was lying there, but apparently recovering very fast. And he had made a settlement for a pretty sizable sum, and so I said, Ben, I said, after this settlement, I'm sure that you call the dispatchers and want to know if the bus is on time again.
Ben Hogan may have been out of golf, his name removed from the sports pages, but he was far from forgotten. Letters and messages poured in from the public that Hogan thought regarded him as a cold fish. It was to have a profound effect on his outlook and his comeback.
I believe it was probably the most wonderful experience of our lives when all of these letters and messages began pouring in, because what impressed both of us most, I think, was that they were from people who never had seen Ben or never had seen me. And in fact, they were from people who admitted they never had been on a golf course, never played golf.
I think it did something to me that it's hard to describe. I was always known as a mum fellow, not talk very much, certainly not bitter about anything, but this gave me an outside insight on life that I didn't know would ever exist with me. I didn't know that many people knew me and wanted me to continue. And I think that played a great part in my determination to come back and play again. And I certainly wanted to come back and win again. Not only for myself and Valerie, but for the people that wrote me and were interested. I'm so pleased and thankful to have found this out.
Just 11 months after the near-fatal crash, Ben Hogan was ready to make his comeback. Not many could believe it. The Los Angeles Open of 1950 drew record crowds and record coverage. Hogan wasn't sure he could do it either, but he had worked very hard at home, and he knew it was a question of whether those legs, bandaged heavily, could carry him for an entire tournament. The sports world marveled as Hogan reeled off great golf despite some cold, rainy weather, which certainly didn't help those aching legs. Ben not only made it through 72 holes, but came in with a score that looked good enough to win. The only man who could catch him was Sam Snead. Sam birdied 2 of the last 3 holes to tie. That meant Hogan would have to go another day, another 18-hole round in a playoff.
I lost the playoff on the first hole, actually. I played my tee shot as far to the left as I dared, but I hooked the ball just a little bit and went out of bounds. And of course, giving Sam a shot in those days was just disastrous. You just don't give Sam a lead, because although he's a terrific golfer and won many, many tournaments, he seems to run better from the front. And he got in front right from the first hole. Sam played fairly well, and I played a bad round of golf. Nevertheless, I was so pleased with my showing there, because I knew then that I could play again and go 72 holes in competition.
Hogan was back. He may have lost, but he showed that he could take the pressure again, physically and mentally. The great sports writer Grantland Rice summed it up.
The people whose hearts went out to Ben when he was in the hospital, the great galleries that followed him around the course, were not applauding a winner or a loser. They were applauding a dead game guy, and they'll keep on applauding him. For, as a wise man once said, courage never goes out of fashion. And so I have the honor, and a very great honor, of introducing a man who the record books will show lost a tournament today. He didn't lose. His legs simply were not strong enough to carry his heart around.
Great golf matches are legendary. One of the most unforgettable was the playoff between those two old rivals from the caddy ranks of Texas, Ben Hogan and Byron Nelson, for the Masters Championship in 1942.
Going to the sixth hole, I was three strokes behind, and I managed to make a great two at the sixth and catch 2 strokes on Ben where he got in trouble and made a bogey, and then I was forced to make a great eagle at the 8th, and finished the round in 69 against Ben 70 after being 3 over par at the end of 4 holes. And I feel for sure that those last 12 or 13 holes is the greatest golf that I ever played in my life.
He played what I think is miraculous golf for about 11 or 12 holes. He was 6 or 7 under par for that stretch. It was a great privilege for me to see it, although I didn't like it at that point. I think this day he probably played his greatest golf. And playing that type of golf and that many holes, 6 or 7 under par for 11 holes at Augusta, is something to behold.
The most famous playoff was to come later at San Francisco's Olympic Club in 1955. By that time, Ben Hogan had won 9 major championships, including the U.S. Open 4 times. A record seemed within his grasp.
I think the greatest disappointment I've ever had in a playoff was when Fleck beat me in San Francisco for the Open. And it seemed like it was a greater disappointment to me because I was positive that I'd won the tournament by 3 shots. I walked in the clubhouse and the newspaper people told me that there was only one person on the golf course that had any possible chance of catching me, and that was Jack Fleck. And I believe at that time he had 4 holes to play, and he needed to birdie 2 of the 4 holes and par the other 2. When they told me that, I was sort of satisfied because I would have hated to been out there trying to birdie 2 of those last 4 holes because they're certainly not easy ones, and they're demanding of all the skill in golf that there is. Jack Fleck did that, and he had to play wonderful golf to do it. And as you know, we had the playoff the next day.
Fleck's putter hadn't cooled off overnight. The little-known pro from Iowa made some fine putts on the first 9 and held the lead over Hogan. Hogan made his move down the stretch, and the last 2 holes were crucial.
I recall him having me 2 shots going to the 17th hole. I picked up a shot on 17. Then I hit my tee shot to the left in knee-high grass, taking a double bogey. And of course he parred and beat me by 3 shots. It was a great disappointment to me in that I've been trying for years to win my 5th Open, and that was as close as I've gotten, and it might be that that's as close as I'll ever get.
Even if he doesn't come close again, Ben Hogan has left an indelible mark on golf's toughest tournament, the U.S. Open. The record book shows he's won 4 and tied for another. Actually, he has won 5 Open championships. In 1942, when the tour was called off because of the war, Ben won the Hail America tournament, played in Chicago and recognized as the Open championship of that year. 3 of Hogan's victories came after his miraculous recovery from the accident. In those days, it was 36 holes on the final day, a test of stamina for even the strongest legs.
I suppose every golfer always has aspirations of winning the Open sometime during their life. I think that's the ultimate, which it is. They invariably pick out the better courses. They doctor them up to make a completely fair test, but you use every shot and every club in your bag. And when you win an Open, it really does something to you, because you say then to yourself, well, maybe I've arrived.
Some of the greatest golf fans in the world are in England and Scotland. They had been clamoring for years to have Hogan play in the British Open, but he had always said no. Finally, in 1953, he could no longer turn down their pleas nor the urging of his friends.
Tommy Armour and Bobby Cruikshank had told me for 2 or 3 years that I must go over there and play and complete my record. And I had a telephone call from Walter Hagen telling me that I must go, and that I must go that year, 1953. I still was undecided where to go or not, because of many things, the weather, the changing of the golf. I didn't know whether I could make the transition quick enough or not. We went over, and I had about 6 days of practice there, and each day I felt this pressure on me of having to change my game very fast to fit the conditions and the course and the small ball. And I kept realizing now why these fellows wanted me to go over and play. I think they wanted to see me get beat, which is all right. I'm glad they persuaded me now. I never shall forget the first day that I played in the tournament, the first hole. Every other time in all the practice rounds, I'd hit a drive and an 8-iron or maybe a 9-iron to a blind green over a hill. The first day of the tournament, the wind was coming right at us from the green, and I hit a drive and a 2-iron as hard as I could nail them, and I was short of the green. I got around in 73 which I was very thankful for. And, of course, I certainly wasn't leading the tournament. But I don't believe that I ever had that much pressure before or since in having to make the transition, first off. And the next thing, since I was the Masters champion and our Open champion, I just felt like I had to win this tournament. There was just no other out. And thank goodness I did. And now, I thank Walter Hagen for calling me, Tom Conner and Bobby Cruikshank for encouraging me to go. It's a fine golf course over there, and the people are just wonderful. And I made a lot of friends, and again, I'm just so thankful that I went over and played.
He was coming home a hero, and America could hardly wait to trot out the brass bands and hurl the confetti. It was all a little bit overwhelming to the man from Texas who literally had to fight his way onto a golf course a few years back.
We got off the boat, went in limousines, of course, to this ticker tape parade, and I must say that there's nothing ever hit me more. And I just couldn't believe it. I still don't believe it. For a little fellow from Dublin, Texas, it's just unbelievable. Meeting the mayor and all the thousands of people and throwing the confetti on you and things like that. I really don't think New York is that cold city. I think it's a very warm place, at least it is to me. I'm so grateful for it. I didn't know I had done all of this to warrant it, and I really don't believe it now. But thank goodness I got it. I hope they aren't sorry. I'm not.
Ben Hogan still plays in a certain number of golf tournaments. He prepares thoroughly for these just as he always did, with hour after hour of practice. There will never be a substandard Ben Hogan on display in tournament golf. Arnold Palmer, king of the modern era, analyzes the Hogan of today.
Well, there's no question about the fact that he plays from tee to green very well. He does have problems with his putting, as we all do from time to time. One of the big difference in the practice round in 1958 that I played with Ben was that I think I shot about 82, and Ben had a very fine round of about probably 71 or something like that, after which I went on to win the golf tournament. Of course, I think that one of Ben's remarks afterwards was, how in the world did that happen? But, of course, that is the way things go. Now, playing with him in the Masters was actually the first competitive round that I have ever played with him, and I thought he played exceptionally well. He didn't putt the ball particularly well. However, he did make some putts, a couple of pretty long ones, and maybe a chip here and there. But there's no question, as time goes on, some of the things that you had in your youth leave you a little bit. And I guess maybe we're just going to have to sit back and realize that. I think that Hogan and Snead, Nelson have been very exceptional men, I think, in their field. Snead is one that has been a very agile person and probably does nothing really but play golf. I think Hogan's ability to keep his game in the condition that he has been wonderful. I think this comes about, though, simply because they have a great desire to play golf and a great desire to win. They have the competitive spirit that made them great players to start with. And, of course, the fact that they don't want to play golf in a sloppy, haphazard manner is something that keeps them playing as well as they do at their present ages.
Yes, trouble on the greens, the yips, as Hogan calls them, has made it painful for Ben in recent years. He's not afraid to talk about it, though, can even laugh at himself. Jimmy DeMerit is sure the problem was caused by the intense fires that burned within Hogan.
I don't think there's a golfer ever lived that was successful that didn't get mad at himself. You notice that the past few years that he's had an awful lot of trouble controlling his composure and his nervous system. The fellow that throws it off and expresses himself, and I certainly think that a man should have that privilege of being able, as long as he's not injuring anyone or uses abusive language, I think that he has a right to throw a club in the air or kick the ground or whatever he so desires to do. But Ben was a sort of an introvert, kept it within himself, and I think that's one of the reasons that it used up his nervous system, and now those little 2.5 and 3 foot putts look like 20-foot side hillers to it.
I agree with Jimmy about the nerves. It's awfully difficult starting out or in the middle or at the end of one's career to overcome nervousness, nervous jerks on the green, short shots around the green. And if you watch me on the green in a tournament nowadays, you'll see me shake and jump and everything else. It's not that I want to do those things. I just can't prevent them. Each and every one of us fight it to hold them intact.
Oh, I am putting much better, Tom. I'm getting the putter back a little quicker. It only takes me about 2 minutes now instead of 5 minutes to get it back.
Some of these fellows can go a little longer than others, but it works on every one of us. It's like water dripping on a rock. It'll find where a hole in it. The toughest part of tournament golf is to keep your keenness from week to week. It's very, very difficult to do. As I understand it, through doctors, your body chemistry changes every 18 hours. And it's pretty hard to be keen, keep your muscles toned and your thinking tuned to a golf game. That's the reason why I used to practice so hard. I used to practice a couple hours before I started every round. I wanted to know which direction the ball was going in that day. Then after I'd play around, I'd sometimes come in and practice again. And the fellow said, well, aren't you tired? And I said, sure, I'm tired, but I have to know where it's going. I don't want to be rested and shooting out of the rough all day long.
We have to practice because of the continual pressure from other players, and it has become so much more of a business of playing golf now than it was in those days. And of course, I don't think that prior to Hogan's days, let's say that it was particularly a profession in itself as it is now. I think that the Nelson, Hogan, Snead era certainly brought about the hard, continual practicing that made golf a popular game as it is, or more popular game, and certainly has brought many, many players into it as a profession than we had ever, or they had ever thought about in those days.
Golf is big business now. The $100,000 tournament is a weekly affair. Men like Ben Hogan help make it for today's pros, but he doesn't begrudge them their good fortune.
I think it's a wonderful thing that they have more money nowadays, and it affords more players to make expenses and stay on the tour and develop their games. I think it's good. And I'm not sorry that they didn't have this money when I was playing, because I've subtracted so much out of this game in pleasures and acquaintances in nice places, nice people that I know and associates. I've been well rewarded. Yes, I recommend anyone to try to become a professional golfer. You meet wonderful people. It's a wonderful life. If I had a son, I would certainly try to recommend that he do this. You're in terrific surroundings all the while. I can't think of a more pleasurable life for any person. I know I've thoroughly enjoyed every second of it. I would like to have done it over and over again. I've always wanted to accomplish much more than I have accomplished. Naturally, I would have loved to have won more tournaments than I've won. But I have the thought nowadays of hoping to put back into golf what I've subtracted. And I'd like to put back much more than I have subtracted. And God willing, I will.
This is the Big Rider. You don't have to be a big spender to own one. 18 feet of luxurious car weighing nearly 4,000 pounds. It's a car that carries you in silence and comfort with a big standard 350 cubic inch V8 engine. You don't have to be a big spender to own the Big Rider. See your Chevrolet dealer and ask for Impala.
The Big Rider, America's most popular car with the big resale value.
Impala, the Big Rider, 18 feet of solid comfort from Chevrolet and your Chevrolet dealer, who have brought you the Ben Hogan story.
The legend of Ben Hogan can be summed up in 5 words: determination, integrity, dignity, competitor, champion.